Morning, good morning, good morning. And thank you. I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from the 3rd Congressional District of Ohio. And it gives me great pleasure during the Congressional Black Caucus's Foundation's annual legislative conference to bring you Money, Wealth, and Disparities with the subtitle of Diversity and Inclusion Matters, because it does. And that is why we are here today. I get so excited when we open the doors and people are already standing outside to come in and to be educated and to be engaged and to hear from some of the most powerful brothers and sisters related to this topic and more. And to be led by a moderator that I am so honored and proud to call my friend. I'll say a little bit more about him before he comes to the podium, and we'll do a more formal introduction of our panel today. But this topic is very personal to me because all my life I've fought for diversity, but more importantly, inclusion. Sometimes organizations and companies, whether it's government, labor, corporate America, tout their diversity, but there is no inclusion. See, if you're on the payroll and you are diverse by any standard, whether that is race or ethnicity, whether that is gender, whether that is rural or veteran or LGBTQ or other, but you're not in the room. You're not at the table when the decisions are being made. Matter of fact, sometimes we're not even in the pipeline to get to the top. So I am so honored to serve on the Exclusive Financial Services Committee, and that alone was enough for me to have a voice for the people. But when Congresswoman Maxine Waters announced that while we were in the majority in the United States Congress, there would be a subcommittee on diversity and inclusion with subpoena power, with power to send out letters to major financial institutions and ask them to respond to our clarion call of tell us, show us, plan with us, change with us your diversity and inclusion plan. I got named to be the chairwoman of the subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. Thank you. Now, under this leadership, we are not just checking the box, but we are going to make it very clear that we are changing history, just like this panel has done, just like most of you in this room. So I want you to know we are fighting and advocating and making the change for you and for your children and our grandchildren, and yes, those yet unborn. So I'm not going to walk you through all the glaring statistics because we know them. We know there's discrimination. We know there's disparities. We know that corporate America does not have women or minorities, and especially black folks, sitting at the helm or serving in corporate America on their boards as they should be. Far too often we get grateful for when an organization, whether it is government or corporate America, starts talking about minority vendors. And everybody raises their hand when we say minority procurement. And yes, that's great, but that's not good enough. A powerful man walked into my office one day and he said, what about business diversity? What about when we talk about the wealth gap? What about the real wealth? What about who manages the assets for these triple-digit billions of dollar companies? What about the pension funds? What about who are the asset managers? Who are the lawyers and the CPAs that look like this room? We didn't have an answer, and nor did they. But here's the good news. We're going to get the answers. And John Rogers, I thank you for that bit of advice, because when you're in the room, you can find out what to ask for. And that's why we are here today, to help you have a better understanding of how you can help us and how we can help you and what we can ask for. Now, let me end with something I'm so honored because it just happened this week. Ever since I've been in Congress, I've been fighting for more women, for more African American and other minorities to be involved. And so I thought, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look at what's out there. And so I went to the National Football League. Because, you know, we see those brothers out there all the time playing and wearing their jersey numbers, and all these people go in and spend millions and billions of dollars because of what's on the back of a black man so often. Or a female tennis player, hockey, soccer, women in general, and minorities. And yet, when you look to the management, let's take the National Football League. No black coaches, no black owners, billions and billions of dollars. And there was a man by the name of Dan Rooney who just died a few years ago who became the diversity chairperson for the National Football League. And so he started by saying, we're going to have the Rooney Rule. Every time that someone is up to be the manager or the owner, we just need one qualified person to be in the room. And I thought, if Dan Rooney with the National Football League could have a Rooney Rule, why couldn't Joyce Beatty have a Beatty Rule in the United States Congress? And so enough people clapped a few years ago. Some kind of put it on pause. But for those of you who know Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, I just went full speed ahead. And it was because of this CBCF ALC workshop. Every year the room is full, and every year you inspire and encourage me. So this past week, unanimously, the Beatty Rule passed. Now, how does that involve you? Every time they are looking for one of the 12 Federal Reserve Bank presidents, there has to be one, at least, that they put in the room, one qualified. I had a Republican colleague to testify and said it benefited him directly because he played in the NFL, now serving in Congress. And you know what he said? He said it was Tony Dungy that changed my life, a black coach. He said one of the best in the nation. White, Republican, and friends stood on the United States House floor and said, I proudly support, vote for, and endorse this bill. We've come a mighty long way. And so now, we will have some options for you. You cannot narrow the wealth gap if we don't talk about housing and jobs and education. So quickly, I want you to know, more people in my district who own homes lose the homes because they cannot pay the property tax. So Cheryl Brooks Sullivan, black woman, treasurer in the county, my district. Stand up, Cheryl, quickly. You know what she said before an audience like this 2 weeks ago? She said, Beatty, we can fix this. We can have a fixed rate. So when that little black family owns that home that they've been in for 20 and 30 years and paid for it, and they've been paying property tax for $400 or $500 a month, and then because the neighborhood changed, because wealthy non-African Americans move in, buy the home for $100,000, put $500,000 in it, and the property tax goes up. How about giving a fixed rate to those families who've been there? So today we come with some resolve. We're going to talk about tax credits for the people, not just for companies. So there'll be a lot more that you will hear from, but now I'm going to turn it over to the moderator. I call him the Honorable, I call him Doctor, I call him friend. He has been with me from the very inception. Two of us, two with me. Michael, before I bring you up, with my girlfriend, best friend who started this journey with us. Where's Susan Taylor? Susan, stand up. Let's give it up. 4 terms in Congress. They came to me when I got elected, and they said, we will stand with you and in front of you on your journey, and they have faithfully been there. Susan is usually up here, and I have to say this, Susan, because everybody's asking me, why isn't Susan up front or on the panel? That's because she's changing the world for us, and she has a speaking engagement, and she's going to also be talking with one of our secretaries. I don't know if I can say too much about what she's doing, but she has 3 panels, but she's here first when she should be somewhere else. Love you. Thank you. What can I say about the doctor? Michael, let me say, first of all, the 2 most powerful words I can say. Thank you. Thank you not only for being here and being my friend, but thank you for what you do across the nation for people. But thank you for standing up for black people. I can't imagine that there's anybody in this room that does not know Michael Eric Dyson and his powerful story. So Google him while you're sitting there so I don't have to tell you how bad this brother is. But if you have a TV and you watch any of the national stations, you will see him talking truth to power. If you tune in to any radio station, and if you go to the bookstores or the libraries or you read online, you will see that he is a prolific author. You will see that he is well educated. But the one thing that I would like to say most that you will witness today, he keeps it real. He's very comfortable with who he is. He understands that we all come from somewhere, but look at where we can end up when we work together. Lastly, in the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. And today, this is done because of our sponsors. And would all of our sponsors stand up? I want to make sure that they know who you are. The Ohio State University, please stand up. Mary Kay, L. Brands, Huntington Bank, General Motors Financial. Am I missing anybody, Kimberly? And lastly, to my wonderful team, I could not do anything that I do without one of the smartest, most prolific team that works with me, not for me, led by my legal counsel and chief of staff, Kimberly Ross. Don Manicki, Director of Communications. Tyler Levinson, Press Secretary. Where's Chanya Davis? Moving around. Chanya, Senior Deputy. Where's Dion Lawson? Keeps all the money straight. Did we pay for this okay? Where's Michael? Where's my babies back there? Where's Michael and where's Layla? Thank you. Staff assistants. They both started with me shortly after college. Michael was promoted, and now he works on the Ledge team, and he's the one that greeted you out front. They are amazing. Also from Columbus, Ohio, Ron McGuire, who used to be with me, and we can't get rid of him. He's here today with one of the foundations as a board member of Fire and Focus Foundation. Okay, I always get in trouble. Did I? Wait a minute, where's Juanita? Juanita Winston, newest to our team, powerful sister. She is our staff director for diversity and inclusion on my financial services committee. Stand up, because we're talking about you today. Diversity and inclusion. This is her work. Are you going to introduce them? Okay, I'm not going to introduce the panel. I'm going to let Michael do that, but I'm going to say thank you, thank you. They are all friends. I've heard all of them. I was with John Rogers last night. A couple months ago in my district in a packed audience, I was with Derek, Jovan. I spent a lot of time with him. And to the 2 bad sisters, thank you. I work with you every day. And to our millennial and baby and new friend and scholar, this is a bad brother, and he's going to sell himself and you on him. I am Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message. When you see me leave, I'm going to leave because we have votes on the United States House floor today. I'll leave, and I'll be back. Let's give it up for Michael Eric Dyson.
Give it up for the Congresswoman and the Beatty Rule. Sharp, insightful, brilliant, beautiful, intelligent, and radiant, and for the people. That's the kind of leadership that we need, especially given what we're living through right now. So I hope you got your voter registration set. Don't just complain about it, do something about it. Even conservative right-wing brothers and sisters think, my Lord, what have we come into? What we done told you since 1619 we've been up against. And it is interesting, and I'll get right to the point because we got brilliant panelists. You don't want to hear from me. But isn't it interesting, the response to 1619? Oh, it must be political correctness. Why is it that you're generating all of this political capital around the notion of black people and slavery and the like? It must be the capitulation to the prevailing winds that are politically correct. They didn't say that yesterday. 20 years in to 9/11. That's not political correctness. That's understanding the viciousness of terror that has besieged this nation from outside forces, and we remember together. So if that's true about 18 years in, what about 400 years in, when we have been deprived of every single right and made it back, and not only made it back, but prevailed? And Joyce Beatty is the daughter of a struggle that has been going on for at least 400 years in this country, and we thank God for her extraordinary leadership and guidance in this time. This morning, I'm going to introduce to you this extraordinary panel. I want y'all to be a little bit more lively. That's lively, right? I know it's tough. I know it's early in the morning, but we got serious business to do. And I'm always honored that Congresswoman Beatty has me talk about money. I ain't got none of it, but I'm hopeful to have some one day. I was sitting next to John Rogers saying, can I just rub this man's elbow so I can get osmotic money? All right, I'm leaving here going to the weed session. If I can't raise my money, I'm gonna get high somehow. So today we have an extraordinary panel. I'm just gonna say their names. This is Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. John Rogers is a financial genius. He is a man who has been serious about the generation of capital for so many millions of Americans. He has put his life on the line so many times financially, in terms of generating interest, not only in this broader nation, but specifically for black folk who are trying to buy into, get a piece of the pie, and then participate in an equitable fashion. When Congresswoman talked about diversity and inclusion, it's one thing to be diverse, but to democratize capital in America is to get to the heart of the matter. So when you got folk like Ken Frazier or Ray McGuire or Robert Smith and John Rogers and so many others, men and women, who have valiantly put their reputations on the line to increase our capacity to engage in the larger circle of American privilege, money is at the heart of that. Capital is at the heart of that. Being rich is one thing, being wealthy is another. So we welcome to the panel and to speak for the next few minutes, right? We're going to try to have very few minutes, and then we can have dialogue with y'all, the founder and CEO of Ariel Investments, Mr. John Rogers.
Thank you, Michael, for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. It's great to see this room full. It's also great to be here with my hero, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. Her leadership has just been extraordinary. When I go out and speak around the country, often in the past, I've been accused of sort of having no hope and kind of being all doom and gloom and how bad things are for us. But after I met the Congresswoman, I said she is sort of our beacon of hope. She's someone who's out there fighting for us, making a difference, who has the courage and the intelligence and the great staff and team to make all of this happen for all of us. So I want to give a special thank you for that. This problem that we're here to talk about is so important, and we've been given each 8 minutes or so to talk, and So I'll try to get right to the heart of the matter. But I want to just really start by talking about how tough things are and how they've gotten worse, and talk about some of the reasons why and some of the solutions that we have had. Growing up in Chicago and living in Chicago, this will be a little bit of a Chicago story, but I hope that some of the things that we've lived through in Chicago are meaningful for other urban communities throughout the United States. You know, I won't go through a lot of data today because all of you have heard a lot of this data about the wealth gap and how far apart we are and how it's been getting worse over the last 30 years or so. But my favorite data point comes from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. Ray Bashara talks about the fact that between 1992 and 2016, college-educated whites saw their wealth soar 96% over that 24-year period, while college-educated blacks saw their wealth decline 10% over that same period. So up 96 for whites, down 10% for our community. I think that's really, really brutal. We know that there's still historical discrimination and racism and structural barriers that have made life very difficult for us. We know that, you know, a lot of it comes down to the fact that we continue to have a big discrepancy in our incomes. We typically make 40% less than the white community. We know that because of restrictive covenants and racism, that we weren't allowed to buy property in the parts of urban communities that grew and where value was created. And that's really a problem. I remember my father used to always tell me the real estate he was buying was going to pay for my college tuition, and it went down every year because he couldn't buy real estate in the parts of the economy and parts of Chicago where the wealth was being created. And instead of inheriting multi-generational wealth and income opportunities, we have multi-generational family obligations and responsibilities that help set us back. And of course have more debt, more student loans, and et cetera, that makes life much more difficult for us. And as I said earlier and touched on, things are getting worse, unfortunately. And things are really a challenge. In Chicago, I often talk about we were sort of we're the beacon of hope. We used to be talked about as a place where great entrepreneurs came and were successful and employed lots of people and created lots of opportunities. But over this last 30, 35 years, we've lost almost all of our major black businesses in Chicago. You know, Johnson Publishing and our iconic Ebony and Jet building was lost. Johnson Products, Soft Sheen Products, they're gone. The big media companies are much smaller than they used to be, whether it's Burrell or The Defender or WVON Radio. We used to have the two largest black banks in the country, Independence Bank and Seaway Bank. They're gone. The insurance companies are gone. It has been an extraordinarily downward spiral. And then when you look at the Crane Chicago Book of List of sort of where the top companies are today, out of the top 300 companies, there's only a couple black firms that make the top 300 private companies. When it comes to the top 25 banks, law firms, accounting firms, real estate firms, architecture firms, insurance firms, construction, public relations, technology, there are 0 African-American firms that make the top 25 of any of those lists in Chicago. And we're a majority minority city. So how can we be nowhere, not even in the top 25 of all those different sectors? Also, according to Cranes, there's only one African-American CEO, Lisa Wardell, of the top 100 companies in Chicago. So 1 out of 100. So today I often tell people that if you're a Chicago public high school student, you have a much better chance of becoming a professional athlete than becoming a partner in a major Chicago professional law firm, accounting firm, consulting firm, hedge fund, private equity, all put together. Because most of those organizations have 0, or not round down to 0, the number of African-American partners or managing directors in this important part of Chicago's economy. It is just really, really tough for us. You would think if we weren't doing as well as entrepreneurs, we'd be getting exposed and included in these large organizations, but it just simply isn't the fact. So you want to know, God, how does this happen? And we all know, this is just to hit the highlights and summarize from a high perspective. We know there's still a lot of unconscious and implicit bias that's out in our society. We see it every day, and it continues to be a pervasive problem. The well-meaning supplier diversity programs have not evolved with our economy. As Congresswoman talked about, we need to move to business diversity, not just include us in the supply chain, construction, catering, and the commodity parts of the spend. We need to be included in the parts of the spend where the wealth's being included. The wealthiest people in Chicago right now are the hedge fund guys, the private equity guys, the people in professional services and technology services. The wealthiest person in Chicago right now is Ken Griffin, who's worth $10 billion with his hedge fund. I call this a modern day Jim Crow. It's never happened before.
No, I think it's a high school thing.
That's a modern day Jim Crow, that the black and the brown people do the construction and the catering, the white guys get to do the professional services and technology and become billionaires. So what I think is also very important, those of us that are in leadership roles, all of us are in leadership roles, have to play a part in speaking up and making sure that we don't allow this to continue. You know, because we know if we don't speak up, we know the white leadership is not going to speak up. You know, we're not their priority. But a lot of us are in boardrooms, a lot of us are in leadership roles, and why we need more progressive leaders like the Congresswoman and others to stand up and fight for us and make a difference. And so why does that matter? You know, Harvard Business School professor Stephen Rogers often talks about the fact he has really hard data showing how African-American businesses hire, of course, other African-Americans and make a big difference in their local communities. I use my best example in Chicago, and Susan knows this. There's the great entrepreneur George Johnson, who actually just lost his wife this week, Joan. He's over 90 years old. But George Johnson created AfroSheen and UltraSheen. And Johnson Products became the first African-American company to ever be listed on a public stock exchange. He had 500 employees at its peak, which was critically important to the community. But he also started Soul Train with Don Cornelius. He started Independence Bank. He worked with Burrell Advertising. He prepaid the advertising in essence in the early days to make sure that they continued to grow and thrive during difficult economic times. He worked with black accounting firms, law firms. He was an extraordinary ecosystem, making sure that all of us grew together. And equally importantly, he was a great philanthropist. He was responsible every year for 70 tables at the Urban League dinner. He was the one that when Dr. King came to Chicago desperate to make payroll, he was the one that brought all the entrepreneurs together and got those vital donations at a critical time in the civil rights movement and made sure that Independence Bank backed critical loans for Dr. King. And when Reverend Jackson came to Chicago to start Operation Push, he's the one that brought the business leaders together to make sure that he had the financial wherewithal to get that movement started in our hometown. So it's so important for us to have dynamic, strong black businesses more than ever. And we make a difference, and it's so extraordinarily uncomfortable that we're going backwards. Now, there are some examples of success, and I'll just hit a couple of highlights and not being exhaustive. I know I'm going to leave someone out, but the University of Chicago, where I'm vice chairman of the board, we've gone from 0 to now 80 professional services firms that do business with the University of Chicago and the University of Chicago Hospital. There are many companies now that are thriving. Everything that we do are included in the spend at the University of Chicago. Exelon Corporation, the utility company based in Chicago, does more to make sure that the giant white firms, law firms, accounting firms, et cetera, have black partners and managing directors on the relationship with the utility, and that's been very important. There are institutions like Northern Trust, and Kelly King is here from Northern, where they have dynamic African-American leaders and 3 African-Americans on the board. And then finally, my favorite company, McDonald's, where I've served on the board the last 17 years. They, of course, you all know about their great success of having African-American franchisees and suppliers that are making a big difference in their local communities throughout the nation and throughout the world. So there are some models of success that we can use. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to us. We've got to ask the tough questions in the boardroom and in our leadership roles. If you guys are an executive somewhere, you make sure that the advertising is going to black publications. You make sure those legal fees are being spread around. You make sure that the financial institutions are working with the institutions that you're involved in. I think it's just so important. And all I'm doing is echoing the sentiments of the great leaders of the past. That's what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta. That's what Harold Washington did in Chicago, Coleman Young in Detroit, Tom Bradley in California. We've had those kind of great successes. And so Dr. King once said, in some of my closing comments, that we will never be liberated from the crushing weight of poor education, squalid housing, and economic strangulation until we are integrated with power into every level of American life. That's what we deserve. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Brother Rogers. Susan Taylor's leaving right now, but you saw her go outside and quiet that band. Queen of Black America, that's the kind of power she got. Thank you so much, Queen. Bring us back a chicken sandwich when you give her. I mean, this is what it's about, what Mr. Rogers just said, right? Democratizing capital, making sure we integrate all the way up, right? Not horizontally, but vertically, and to make certain that we are part and parcel, woof and warp, of the very distribution mechanism, but also the intake mechanism. And what the Beatty rule does is so important for the Reserve Bank, where all the capital, all the decisions, the fiduciary responsibilities of the United States of America are being generated. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for that. You had me in talking about Mr. Johnson at Soul Train. That's my youth. I'm sure we had bigger afros back then, right? This is a dead audience, but damn, where's the Undertaker? Because y'all got to rise up here, right? These jokes ain't free. Don't make me do my daddy jokes. What did Tennessee? Same thing, Arkansas. Don't make me go to that level. But we are honored for all of these wonderful panels. We'll turn now to Ms. Shonda Robinson. She's an extraordinary woman. She is GM Financial's Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Leader, and she's responsible for executing and implementing world-class initiatives that promise GMF and its employees success. And I'm from Detroit. GM is very kind in my heart. I'm looking for a GM car, so maybe we can talk afterward. But I love also, you went to Knoxville College too, right? At an HBCU. I was there too. And what a great school. We're trying to get it opened again. We're trying to get people to invest again, because when you have the kind of capital that Mr. Rogers has talked about, you can filter it through our institutions to make sure that they stay alive, because folk ain't understanding why it's important. For instance, we have the University of Michigan here. Oh, okay. Wolverines. Well, oh, they're sponsors. The Ohio State. Wear security, because we do not allow gang signs and symbols in this place. Ms. Shonda Robinson. All right. Okay, good. All right.
Before she comes up, it is my distinct honor to acknowledge in the House that we have our chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, no other than the Honorable Cedric Richmond. Do you want to say something? As you also may know, this bad brother was also the immediate past chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. No, not in our history have we had someone to serve back-to-back terms. This is a bad brother. He brings a strong agenda, and I'm proud to call him my good friend.
The only reason why everybody thinks I'm so smart, I just do what Joyce Beatty and Marcia Fudge and the other women of the CBC tell me to do. But you can see by the substance of Congresswoman Beatty's panel that she really has a passion for our communities and how we uplift our communities. Far too often, even some of our friends, they want to chart solutions for us in spite of ourselves. And the one thing that Congresswoman Beatty knows is that we have the intellectual capacity to sit at the table and chart our own path and to figure out how to solve our problems, which is why I'm such a big proponent of HBCUs. I heard you say that when I walked through the door, but you have to go a little bit further and say something about Morehouse in the next sentence. So let me just thank the panelists for being here. We know that it's a sacrifice when you come, and I just want the audience to know that you all do it because of the love of the agenda. And the CBC, all 55 members, we recognize the sacrifice it is to come. We're glad that you all are coming, but we can't spend all our time in the huddle. So when we finish this weekend, we have to break the huddle and go back out to our communities and run those plays. And thankfully we have Congresswoman Beatty, who's helping us convene the huddle. So thank you all very, very much. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Where is it? It's right here. Right?
Yes. No, let's go back to. It's right here. Okay. Do I just, that's okay. Do I just arrow through? That one? Okay. Okay. That's okay. No problem. Good morning. To my esteemed co-panelist, where's Firecracker Joyce Beatty? Did she leave? Okay. She is simply amazing. I really admire her tenacity and her commitment to diversity and inclusion. I always tell people, when I was in 5th grade, I knew this was what I wanted to do. I didn't know per se diversity and inclusion, but I knew it was work in helping others. And I'll say what I've said to others. I didn't find my passion found me. And so I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity. This is, I think, my 3rd time speaking on her panel, and what I love is really the interaction from all of you and just your commitment. You being here says how committed you are to diversity and inclusion, and we know that diversity matters. So I'm going to walk you through a little journey. I'm going to start with very high level. I won't bore you with a lot of data. And then I'll end with some things that we're doing at GM Financial to make a difference in this space. So I want to start with, let's see. Uh-oh. There we go. Uh-oh. There it is. There we go. Okay. Thank you. So in order for us to improve the future, we have to take a look at our past, right? So let's start with kind of where this journey started. So most of us can remember affirmative action, right? So we know kind of the story around affirmative action and some of the results that we receive from affirmative action. So of course it was legally mandated for organizations to really look at affirmative action. We know on the flip side of that, it also created the notion of quotas. And we know where that has pretty much brought us today with quotas is the implications that there is reverse discrimination in the workplace, really focused on targets and not necessarily targets in a good way, because we can talk about targets in a more productive way, but really not in a way that talks about more inclusion as opposed to just diversity. And then we moved through the 70s and started being introduced to equal employment opportunity, or commonly referred to as EEO. The objective was to eliminate discrimination in HR policies and practices. But again, when you have hidden biases and hidden discrimination, it's kind of hard to legally mandate that, right? Because this is really a morality issue, and we can't
legislate morality, because it's really a heart matter. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. Again, legally mandated. The objective was also to provide equal access and opportunity where no one was excluded from participation. So let's move forward to when this notion of diversity and inclusion was introduced. Intended to be inclusive of all groups, so not just based on ethnicity or gender, but also, veteran status, sexual orientation, all inclusive of that. Focus on developing an environment that maximizes the potential of all employees, so really leveling the playing field. So not just bringing about diversity in the workplace, and Dr. Dyson mentioned that it's not just about having diversity present, but it's what we do with the diversity once we have it at the table. It's like being more inclusive, so really creating this inclusive environment. Business necessity based on workforce trends, and I want to talk about that for a minute. When we talk about workforce trends, we know that companies that have a diversity and inclusion strategy outperform those companies that don't. Studies have shown that. I don't have to show you the data to prove that. And then, of course, this wasn't a legal mandate. So organizations were really looking for diverse practitioners and professionals to really think about how do we transform the culture and environment in such a way that it becomes more inclusive just automatically. And not automatically, but meaning we're not legally mandated to do something, but it's really transforming the workforce. And it's creating this value proposition for companies and organizations to have this strategy that really makes a difference. So I want to start off with this quote, and I love this quote. It comes from this diversity and inclusion paper from McKinsey back in 2018 that says, many successful companies regard D&I as a source of competitive advantage. For some, it's a matter of social justice, corporate social responsibility, or even regulatory compliance. And really the bottom line, for others, it's essential to their growth strategy. And that's what diversity and inclusion is about today. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, let's really think about more, how do we make corporate America more inclusive so that we have more diversity present at the table where the decisions are made. So let's look at some, I did bring some data, so not a ton, but some. So let's look at the numbers when we look at women in S&P 500 companies. So we can see, perfect triangle, most organizations are. So when you look at total employees, almost 50% of total employees in S&P 500 companies are women. The higher you go, the less diversity you see. It's common. This information is not new to any of us. But this is where I want to focus on the change and the transformation that has taken place over the last couple of years when we look at the seats gained or lost from 2016 to 2018 with Fortune 100 organizations. So you look at that and you see this is a table that we want to present. This is where we need to have the presence and the voice of more inclusive leadership at the table. And this is where it really makes a difference. And so for those of you that are sitting here in leadership positions, I just left a conference in Chicago and we were talking about, it was very interesting, there was a breakout session on privilege, on white privilege. They had 4 breakout sessions. One was white American, Hispanic, Asian Pacific, and then African American panelists. And I happened to sit in the one on white American. And they were talking about privilege and the level of privilege that white Americans have that they may not be accustomed to or even want to admit. But as I was sitting there, I was thinking about leadership and what opportunities leadership affords a lot of us. And we are privileged when we are in leadership positions. So my question to those of you that are in leadership is, what are you doing with your privilege? Who are you bringing to the table? Who are you bringing along with you? How are you developing? How are you mentoring? How are you reaching back and bringing up the next generation of leaders? That's what it's about. So when we talk about inclusive leadership, we all have a responsibility to say or to do something that really matters to bring up the next generation of leaders. So let's look at the numbers, some of the numbers that Fortune actually presented. 17.5%, almost 18% of Fortune 500 companies employ 17.5% of the total workforce. So this is almost 18% of these companies employ this. Out of this year's Fortune 500 list, 400 companies share no data about the gender or ethnicity of their employees. Now, again, this should be a legislative matter where companies are more transparent, because that's how we hold organizations accountable for what they are doing with their diversity and inclusion strategy. Is if you're not going to be transparent about it, there's little to no accountability involved. And so it's not only asking the questions, but asking to see that information. At GM Financial, we provide a report each year to the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to report our numbers. Good or bad, increase or not, it's what we do, and we are committed to that. Is there room for us to grow? Absolutely, and I'll share some of those numbers with you, but it is something that we are committed to being transparent, being open about, and we want to share that information. Only 3.2% of companies on the Fortune 500 list release complete data for the race and gender of their employees in each job category and management level. Again, accountability. How are we holding these organizations accountable if we don't know the information? 75% of Fortune 500 firms publishing their numbers are in the tech space. Isn't that interesting? 75%. 38.6% of the Fortune 100's board seats are held by women and minorities. Now, while this may be impressive in terms of where we have come from, there's still work to do in this space. So again, when you're in these leadership positions and you're on these boards, what are you doing with the privilege that is afforded to you to bring somebody else along? And then 2018, the number of board seats among Fortune 500 companies occupied by African American or Black women increased by 32 or 26.2% from 2016. Again, impressive increase. There's still work to be done. So let's look at the numbers at GM Financial, and I'll share some of the things that we are doing. 54% of our U.S. team members are professionals of color. Quite impressive. And it's really by nature of the business that we have. So we have everything from entry-level positions all the way to C-suite management, of course. We have the typical corporate America structure, so legal, finance, and then we also have a large demographic of call center employees, so customer service, collections, things like that. So pretty diverse organization just by way of the industry that we have and the positions that are available at the organization. 60% of our global workforce is women. Very impressive. Again, you would not expect that in financial services because it typically is a male-dominated industry, but really proud to say that 60% of our workforce is women. 37% of our U.S. leaders are professionals of color. So again, not exactly where we'd like for it to be, but definitely making strides in that area. And 45% of our leaders are women in the U.S. Again, making strides in that area, particularly if 54% of our workforce are women. We'd like to have the numbers very similar. In 2018, 56% of our promotions were women. Again, when we talk about mentoring and doing things to develop people and prepare them for those positions before they come, this is where it all starts. It's what are we doing with the privilege that is afforded to us. And then 53% of the promotions in 2018 were professionals of color. So I want to talk just a minute before I close, and I want to share very similar to the Beatty rule, one thing that we implemented at GM Financial is an opportunity rule. So very similar to the Rooney Rule, knowing that we need to make a difference, particularly in our officer level positions, we are implementing an opportunity rule. And that says for every officer level position that we have available, there is a candidate of color or minority on that slate of candidates, a qualified candidate. And again, this levels the playing field and it expands the opportunity to those that are qualified. We're also working on inclusive leadership in terms of training and developing our workforce to understand what unconscious bias is, or even conscious bias in a lot of cases, and how that impacts in the hiring the termination process, the promotion process, and the development process. I do think that lack of exposure for a lot of our team members, a lot of our leaders, says, oh, I'm not realizing that I'm operating from a place of bias in some of those cases. So we continue to do development on an ongoing basis. And then I always encourage our leaders to connect with someone that doesn't look like you. So we have a world-class mentoring program across the organization. We're taking it global next year that really focuses on just this. It is connecting leaders to team members across the organization that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to meet each other. And that has made a huge difference in that 56% promotions in 2018. That's where that comes from, because team members are getting exposed to parts of the business, parts of leadership, other dynamics that they normally wouldn't be exposed to. And for that, I'm really, really proud of the work that we're doing. We still have a ways to go. The work continues. And I'll leave with this quote that I have on my board in my office. It's not just about optic diversity, but it's also about inclusive diversity. So thank you.
Let's get it up with Ms. Robinson again. Who are you bringing with you? Don't be a Lone Ranger. Tonto is on the Diversity and Inclusion Project and will do more work than High Old Silver and the Bullet. I'm working up here, y'all. Help me out. We next have distinguished young scholar, Professor Derek Hamilton, the Executive Director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at the Michigan State University. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. University of Michigan. No, that's Ohio State University. Again, the gang slurs will not be tolerated in this session. In addition, Professor Hamilton holds a primary faculty appointment in the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and he's also in the Department of Economics and Sociology in the College of Arts and Sciences. He's a pioneer and internationally recognized scholar in the field of stratification economics, which fuses social science methods to examine the causes, consequences, and remedies of racial, gender, ethnic, tribal, nativity, inequality in education, economic, and health outcomes. He's born and raised in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the livest one, BK to the fullest. Biggie. Sharp young man, and you can see he's a brilliant and gifted and engaged scholar. I got a note from Steph Curry and Drake saying that after being in exile because of unwarranted light skin privilege, unwarranted, you heard what I said, just showing up being like that ain't enough. We got to deconstruct colorism. However, after Denzel and Idris Elba and Wesley Snipes have dominated, yellow Negroes are coming out from exile. And Drake is proud, and Derek Hamilton, we thank you for your service. Come on up, brother. All right.
So Professor Dyson just took all my thunder, but if we put our hands together, I think I'm gonna win on the darker side. No, in all seriousness, I'm with gratitude. I'm here. I thank the Congresswoman. I thank the chairman who spoke earlier, and I thank my fellow panelists for all the work that they do with regards to economic inclusion. And indeed, my remarks today are going to be about economic inclusion and then some policies to achieve it. I'll try to be relatively brief. You know, academics can be long-winded because I recognize that there are other people on the panel that need to go. In terms of economic security, wealth is both the beginning and the end. Wealth provides financial agency and economic security to take risk and shield against financial loss. It is the paramount indicator of economic well-being and social mobility. Wealthier families are better positioned to finance elite education, access capital to start a business, finance expensive medical procedures, reside in higher amenity neighborhoods, exert political influence, purchase better counsel if confronted with an expensive legal system, leave a bequest, and withstand financial hardship resulting from any number of emergencies. It is wealth that begets more wealth. That's how we generate wealth. Wealthier families with financial advantage buy crucial additional advantages for their children, such as the ability to obtain a college degree without the costly educational arbitrage of debt. Lack of wealth prevents many families from accessing this advantage, continuing an ever-increasing distance between those born with resources versus those born without. What is critical to note is that it was never the case that a white asset-based middle class simply emerged. Rather, it was government policy and to some extent literally government giveaways that provided whites with the finance, the education, land, and infrastructure to accumulate and pass down wealth. In contrast, by both design and implementation, blacks were largely excluded from policies that created the wealth-generating benefits that I described. And when blacks were able to accumulate land and enterprise, it was often stolen, destroyed, or seized by government-complicit threat, fraud, and terror. Today, regardless of race, the top 10% of households hold nearly 80% of the nation's wealth. More specifically, the top 0.1%, those who earn over $1.5 million a year, own about as much of the nation's wealth as the bottom 90%. Moreover, the bottom 50% of earners in America own about 1% of the nation's wealth. This obscene concentration and its accompanying plutocracy, the likes of which we haven't seen since around the Great Depression, is driven by a class of white billionaires. Still, race is a stronger predictor of wealth than class itself. The typical black family has about $17,000 in median wealth. That's inclusive of home ownership. And that's nearly $150,000 less than the $171,000 median wealth that's held by white families. A racial wealth gap where the typical black family has about a dime for every dollar in wealth as a typical white family is in and of itself an implicit measure of our nation's racist past. Regardless of race, our extreme concentration of wealth at the top is undemocratic and it's indicative of plutocracy. We have a racial wealth gap in which black and brown households have little to no wealth and in which the experience of a typical white household is extremely more fortunate and privileged than that of a black household. And then finally, we have an unjust racial wealth gap rooted in history in which whites have been privileged by government-complicit political and economic intervention that afforded them access to resources and iterative and intergenerational accumulation while exploiting and extrapolating the resources and personhood of black people by fraud, theft, and violence. In terms of debt, what we traditionally might conceive of as good and bad debt has different implications once we consider race and the prevailing framework of targeting unprivileged racial groups with inferior housing and educational products, predatory finance, as well as ongoing housing and labor market discrimination that limits the choice set and rate of return to home ownership in a college degree based on one's race or ethnicity. We know that blacks who live in families where the head graduated from college have less wealth, typically, than white families where the head dropped out of high school. We know that black expectant mothers with a college degree have a greater likelihood of an infant death than a comparable white woman who dropped out of high school. We know that a black man with a college degree is 3 times more likely to die from stroke than a comparable white man who dropped out of high school. In essence, education is not the magic antidote for the enormous racial disparities that result from a history and ongoing state-complicit laws, policies, and economic arrangement. None of this is intended to diminish the value of education. There is clear intrinsic value along with a public responsibility to expose everyone with a high-quality education that teaches them to synthesize and fuse information into big ideas, along with encouraging the teachers trained to deliver that curriculum from grade school all the way through college. Black Americans have always been highly motivated to pursue education, but the reality is that as a group, they are financially crippled. Our alarming trend in student indebtedness in the context of stagnating wages and growing income and wealth disparity points to an unjust economic vulnerability, and in the aftermath of the Great Recession, this vulnerability has accelerated. We have to reach back to the greatest generation, a generation born nearly a century ago, to find a comparable generation that has lower home ownership rates than young millennials do today. What's even more disheartening is that the racial gap in young adult home ownership is larger for millennials than it's ever been, tracing all the way back through the greatest generation over 100 years ago. So what can we do about this? Analogous to Medicare for All, we could remove the threat and social and psychological stigma associated with the burden of finance at the point of delivery of education, a point in which a highly motivated but low-resource student is most vulnerable. And we could pursue the restorative justice by canceling all educational debt associated with existing loans. We could make all public colleges, community colleges, universities, and HBCUs tuition and fee free. In other words, we could establish higher education as a universal economic right, and given the ongoing racism that still goes on in colleges and universities, we could fully fund stereotype-safe environments of HBCUs. To address our growing plutocracy resulting from growing gross concentrations of wealth, we need a wealth tax. To address wealth more generally, baby bonds would establish a universal birthright to capital, a privilege of wealth. The privilege of wealth should not be the exclusive domain of the wealthy. Baby bonds would provide all Americans with a capital foundation to build wealth and asset security. Moreover, we need an honest and sobering confession of our historical sins of slavery, a point in American history when blacks were literally the capital assets of a white landowning plantation class, sharecropping, white capping, Jim Crow, and the exclusion of blacks from New Deal and post-war policies that built an asset-based white middle class. This authentic analysis would counter the neoliberal frame that caricatures black, brown, and poor people as welfare queens, deadbeat dads, and undeserving, and instead pave the way for narratives that more accurately frame inequality and poverty as being grounded in resource deprivation. However, acknowledgement and apology alone, that would be empty if not accompanied with some form of material redress. Reparations is a necessary ingredient if, as a nation, we ever want to achieve racial justice. To achieve these ideals, we need a sustained politics that's not narrowly constrained by what seems feasible, where feasibility is defined by the politics of the here and now, of our immediate past, which has been increasingly dominated by economic consolidation and plutocracy. We need a bold, transformative, race and gender-conscious economic Bill of Rights. There are a set of enabling goods and services that are so crucial for individual life, liberty, and self-determination that their quantity, their quality, and access should not be vulnerable to the pricing and rationing that come about from firms trying to meet their profit-maximizing fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. We need public options. We need public options that directly compete with and crowd out inferior private options. We need those options to guarantee the universal and quality access to health care, housing, schooling, financial services, capital, and the free mobility without the psychological and physical threat of detention or bodily harm at the hands of a state-sanctioned terror because someone's social identity is linked to a vulnerable or stigmatized group. Rather than a $2 trillion tax cut and so-called jobs law for the wealthy that imposes pressure on state and localities to rely on fines and fees to balance their local budgets, The federal government should be looking to end mass incarceration, especially of nonviolent offenders, and hold police criminally and civilly responsible for their abusive practices when they occur. And rather than cajoling and bribing a for-profit private sector with tax incentives, the federal government should initiate the economic right to a productive and quality job with the economic security of a living wage and worker amenities that provide investment in our public physical and human infrastructure. I'm not talking about an employer of last resort program, but a viable alternative to undesirable low pay, low benefits, and poor working conditions. Moreover, the jobs would address our 21st century physical and human capital infrastructure needs, including our increasing vulnerability to natural disaster resulting from our unnatural climate change, which will require substantial public investment. In closing, I encourage members of Congress, government officials, and advocacy organizations to reject the empirically unsubstantiated rhetoric that ignorance, so-called grit, and personal responsibility are the sources of inequality. Along with the accompanying neoliberal paternalism in which the government attempts to coerce and incentivize insinuated defective people to behave accordingly and make better decisions. Instead, change the paradigm. Be bold. Work at the federal level, work at the local level, go into progressive and conservative communities, advocate for programs and initiatives that truly empower people with economic security, dignity, and agency to define and achieve their self-determined goals. And finally, have a long-term vision not caught up in the myopic neoliberal frame of scarcity, which at the outset constrains us from reimagining the society that we all want and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hamilton, for that invigorating brief in behalf of, among other things, a serious and conscientious reparations. Now, we'll have Joseph M. Vaughn, who's the Executive Director of the Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Forum and Managing Director of Governmental Relations for the Williams Group. Mr. Vaughn has more than 20 years of experience in directing federal, state, and local intergovernmental affairs, advocacy campaigns, and related economic development projects. The Williams Group advances the public policy goals of clients with a key focus on issues related to financial market regulation, public-private partnerships, trade and private sector diversity, and inclusion performance. Mr. Vaughn.
Good morning, everyone. Isn't God good? And all the time? For more than 20 years, I've attended this conference, and I've sat where you sit, and I'm so honored to be a part of this panel today. And I'm going to tell you, it's hard to follow Derek, because Derek was hitting it hard. And I want to tell him I appreciate him for saying the things that I'm not able to say. But I'm going to try to speak today to some of these issues in a way that I think is really constructive. So I want to begin by first saying thank you to Chairwoman Beatty for her dynamic leadership on so many issues. Chairwoman Beatty is leveraging her leadership role to speak truth to power. And what is that truth? In every facet of our economy, greater diversity and inclusion will empower future innovation and economic success. Historical context matters. For those of us who have endeavored to advance the cause of diversity, we are often faced with the daunting task of convincing individuals and institutions to change. One of my heroes, Joe Madison, often quotes the late, great Washingtonian Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, who said that in America, we are culturally conditioned to believe that women and people of color are inferior, and that the manifestation of that cultural conditioning is that in America, we undervalue, underestimate, and marginalize the contributions of women and people of color. So how does that cultural conditioning manifest itself in the corporate environment? Women and people of color are all too often the last hired, the first fired, paid less, and promoted last, and our ideas and work products are often undervalued. In August, we celebrated Women's Equality Day and Black Women's Equal Pay Day. We are reminded on both of these important dates that women in America, on average, earn approximately 82 cents for every dollar their white male counterpart earns. Further, the analysis shows that African American women earn only 61 cents for every dollar, which accrues to $946,000 over the span of a 40-year career. The source of these statistics is the U.S. Census Bureau, and according to the Bureau, these disparities apply to both low-wage and high-wage earners. These compensation disparities also apply to men of color. We are underrepresented in every facet of corporate America, and I'm very concerned that our participation has plateaued. By that I mean the definition of diversity is evolving so quickly that soon it will include everyone but us. People of color have to be exceptional with impeccable credentials, the right name, and educational pedigree just to get our foot in the door. While these shortcomings are not equally true of every organization and corporation, they exemplify how cultural perceptions can shape business policies, practices, and outcomes. These are the issues that Chairwoman Waters and Chairwoman Beatty have sought to address this year. But before we examine their efforts, we must acknowledge that their efforts would be muted if not for the outcome of the 2018 election. Elections matter. This year, the House passed several key diversity and inclusion bills, including but not limited to the Equality Act of 2019, the Paycheck Fairness Act, as well as the Rooney Rule legislation, Ensuring Diverse Leadership Act of 2019, which Chairwoman Beatty championed. And believe me, there are more to come. Congressional hearings this year have identified troubling trends in mortgage lending, fintech, credit ratings, discretionary fees charged to consumers, and board diversity. Each of these has a tangible impact on wealth creation in the United States, and there's a direct correlation between access to these important financial tools and wealth building. Sadly, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, African American home ownership has hit a 50-year low. In fact, in a recent study by Clever, a real estate company, found that over the 50-year window since 1969, median home prices have increased 121%, while median incomes have grown only 29% for all Americans in real dollars. It is for these reasons that we must transform the culture of corporate America into a true meritocracy that evaluates every person and every business on the merits of their expertise and abilities and fairly compensates and promotes talented leaders. Lisa Toppin, a great chief diversity officer, once told me that diversity and inclusion efforts will not be successful until they become self-replicating across the business enterprise. To achieve this end, companies must undertake a comprehensive transformation to ensure they eliminate both conscious and unconscious bias and address business practices that yield both intentional and unintentional discriminatory outcomes. To that end, I've been chastised by a great friend on Capitol Hill who accuses me often, I might add, and financial services firms of engaging in happy talk. When we speak optimistically regarding the changes we see occurring in the financial services sector. Nevertheless, I believe it's important to acknowledge the hard work and commitments that have taken place, even though discernible shifts in overall metrics of performance have yet to be realized. For example, the CEO Action for Diversity Inclusion was launched in 2017 and aims to rally the business community to advance diversity inclusion within the workplace. The pledge was led by Tim Ryan, the CEO of PwC, and has been co-signed by 750 CEOs and organizations. In August, the Business Roundtable published its Purpose of a Corporation, which defines a fundamental set of principles companies can and should commit to, including pay equality, education and training, and fostering diversity, inclusion, dignity, and respect. 181 CEOs have signed on to that pledge. These efforts are opportunities, a seed, if you will, with the potential to yield transformational change in corporate America that will level the playing field and be a catalyst for economic growth in our country. But like any seed, these efforts need water. And in many respects, that water is an ongoing demonstration of the commitment. When prospective employees consider a role at a potential firm, they research a company's website. They visit Glassdoor and LinkedIn. They call current and former employees. They perform due diligence to determine whether this is the right environment for them. When investors are making investment decisions, they want to know if the company they are investing in will be profitable. But they also want to know if the company shares their values. S&P's Environmental, Social, and Governance Index, ESG, for example, is a tool that examines socially responsible business performance. The Bloomberg Gender Equity Index tracks the financial performance of companies committed to advancing women in the workplace. Diversity and inclusion performance matters in employees, suppliers, investors, and policymakers will want to know if your firm shares their values. Effective disclosure is a key tool to communicate your values. In August, Chairwoman Waters and Beatty published an aggregated infographic of diversity and inclusion performance based on data shared with the House Financial Services Committee from the megabanks following a key hearing in the spring. The data highlighted key areas of performance that must be improved. An important takeaway from this process is that I did not see a single hit piece or negative article in the press or media. The world did not come to an end, and I'm not aware of any litigation resulting from the sharing and disclosure of this data. I say this because 37 other systemically important banks received similar data requests in May, and we are likely to see similar aggregated findings related to their performance this fall. Section 342 of Dodd-Frank mandated the creation of offices of minority and women inclusion at the federal financial regulatory agencies. These offices are tasked with conducting assessments of diversity and inclusion performance. The OMWI directors have worked stridently since 2011 to educate and build bridges of understanding and dialogue with the business community to build confidence in the assessment process. They hosted roundtables in Charlotte, New York, Chicago, Boston, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere. They offered to collect the data anonymously. They have considered empowering third partners to collect and aggregate relevant data, all in an effort to build confidence with regulated entities and allay concerns that the assessment process was a nefarious effort. Unfortunately, the business community has failed to respond constructively to these efforts. In fact, only 3% of entities regulated by the SEC who received data requests submitted data to the agencies in 2018. The industry should take a leap of faith and help create benchmarks of performance, even if you leverage a trade association or other market partner to do so. If firms do not publish benchmarks of performance, we can never assure stakeholders that the progress is real and not just happy talk. Finally, each person in this room is a leader. If you can hear my voice, you are a leader and can contribute to this effort. For example, each of us has an obligation to leverage our understanding of financial literacy to educate others. Do you know a good, trustworthy financial advisor? If so, introduce them to your network. Promote financial literacy at your church or other organizations where you may serve or volunteer. Educate your colleagues in the office around policies and business practices you believe are working well or are not inclusive, even if that comes in the form of an exit interview. Joe Madison often asks his listeners, is this a moment or a movement? If we do not elevate our voices and act, this opportunity will pass and sustainable progress will be fleeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have Mr. Cedric Brown, international artist and fashion designer, young man, 28 years old. He's also a visual artist. In his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, he runs a family-owned apparel business. Raised by a single mother, her phenomenal style was his inspiration for his fashion sketches. Instead of getting caught up in the self-destructive cycle of a fatherless home, he chose to express himself through his art. And through his hard work and perseverance, he received national scholarships and grants to pay his way through college, including the CBCF Spouses, Visual Arts, and Education Scholarships. Let's welcome Mr. Brown today.
Well, son, I tell you, life for me has not been no crystal stair. Cited from the famous Langston Hughes poem, Mother to Son. Being a young black male in this fashion industry has not been easy. I grew up in a single-parent household. I'm a first-generation college student, and I graduated high school in the turmoil of the 2008 Great Recession. I had no money, just dreams, well, just faith that my dreams could come true. And you should have seen the looks of my teachers and my peers' faces when I told them I want to go to art school and study fashion design. Shouldn't you pick a career more stable? In 2010, I had something really bad happen to me. Our house went into foreclosure, and it was a sudden eviction. It was one of the worst feelings ever in the world, and I felt like I never want to see my mom go through a situation like that again. But by September of that same year, I had something amazing happen to me. By September of that same year, I had something amazing happen to me. I received a letter in the mail that I had just won this national scholarship, and that scholarship was the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Visual Arts and Spouses Education Scholarships. I was jumping around my house for a week. And on top of that, my school, Georgia Perimeter College, sponsored me to come up here to D.C. to attend the ceremony. And I was honored alongside Robert Townsend, Alice Walker, and I even got to bring my mom with me to come to attend the ceremony. This opportunity was so amazing, and it really made me feel like the sky was the limit. I still had the chance of becoming a star fashion designer and that my dreams could come true. I want to say thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and Congresswoman Joyce Beatty for investing in the arts and also in our youth. Throughout college, I ended up winning several scholarships and grants to pay my way through school. I graduated debt-free with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Savannah College of Art and Design. On top of that, I worked for some very big, well-known fashion companies here in America, such as Sears Kmart, Lee & Fong Limited, and Carter's Oshkosh. But with this prestigious school and with this also internship experience, it was very difficult for me to get a stable job in the fashion industry. We often hear stories about there not being enough black models on the runway or in the marketing ads, but as of lately, I really feel that that's really not a problem anymore. Our musical talents and our athletes are used for ways to make them money, but I think it's something that we should look at a little bit deeper. Last year, we had a few big, well-known, fashion-renowned brands to have horrendous ads. Let's take a look at Prada, Moncler, and Gucci. They used blackface in their graphics, and they made it as if it was okay or if it was cool to do. Or also, let's look back at H&M with the slogan, "Coolest monkey in the jungle," which was put on a young black boy. Obviously, it's little to none blacks in these design and marketing rooms. And if they are there, do they have power? Do they move up as their white and Asian counterparts? Do they have those chances to be design executives? Or are these factors just based off of aesthetics, skills, and experience? We as people, we have that power to be on social media. We basically control Black Twitter. We post and we talk about our favorite fashion brands, and we also spend our money on our favorite fashion brands. I think what we should do, we should start supporting our designers that support us, or even some minority designers. Tag them, repost them, share them, talk about them just like you do those Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and Prada bags. So, And so through this struggle of being a fashion designer, I'm still climbing. I'm Cedric Brown. I'm an international fashion designer and visual artist. My business is Cedric Brown Collections, and for 4 years I have ran it. I paint abstract designs that are put on silk scarves, ties, bow ties, socks, and kimonos. And my slogan is, you can hang these on the wall or you can wear it to the mall. And my business is, my slogan also is from evening wear to streetwear, CBC makes a chic statement. I've had my designs worn by some, I've had my design worn by some notable celebrities such as rapper Young Thug, singer Tamala Mann, actress Vivica A. Fox, the CEO of Lowe's, Marvin Ellison, the CEO of Denny's, Arthur Miller. And also on this season of the hit show Greenleaf, my designs are worn by the lead characters, Lynn Whitfield, who plays Lady May, and also Lamar Rucker. And also Lamar Rucker, who plays Jacob Greenleaf. Throughout my struggles of becoming a fashion designer, there are a few nuggets that I just wanted to share. Number one is to believe in yourself. Never let a jurist, or employer, or another artist, or a family member, whoever lets you feel that you're not good enough and that you don't have the skills to make your dreams come true. Trust me, I've been there. Last year, I lost my job where I was a contractor for Caucus. I worked in technical design for over a year and a half. I came into work one Monday morning and HR called me in the office and they told me that my last day would be that Friday. You should have seen, like, I just felt like I had this fear, like, okay, what am I gonna do next? I always had this job and I also had my business at the same time. I used that fear to trigger me to have faith in myself and believe that no matter what's going on, I can still make my dreams come true and that I still can grow my business. So for over a year and a half now, I have been full-time with my business and I have not punched the clock in for no one. And as my mom would say, to hell with them. From Boston to Las Vegas to New Orleans at the Essence Festival, I have been doing pop-up shops all over the country. I've even been commissioned by some big corporations to be their featured artists. Evershed Sutherland, the 16th largest law firm in the world, commissioned me to create a Boston collection. Where they flew me out to Boston, and they had me give out these gifts to their international clients from all over the world. On top of that, I had the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas fly me out, and they gave out my scarves and kimonos to their special guests at their Women's Leadership Conference. I say all that to say is to believe in yourself no matter what looks off or you may be fearful, things can turn around. Number two, be your own salesman. When I graduated from art school, I had this artist mindset that I create these beautiful pieces. People are automatically going to buy my work. They're just going to love it. They're going to be blah, blah, this and that. And it does not work like that. And on top of that, I was a bit shy. I wasn't always that confident in talking in front of people. And one day I was telling my problems to my mom in the car, and she yelled, "If a person can stand out on the street and sell a crack rock and risk their life, I know you can sell this scarf and you legit." And from that moment, something triggered in my head. I know a lot of people in my community and in my family that has bad records and they have lack of opportunity and they don't have the chance that I have to make my dreams come true. So since I do have this chance, I need to do all I can to make that happen. And number three is to be persistent. I feel that hard work, well, I just know hard work beats talent any day. Hard work beats talent any day. Often, I think about my competitors and people may feel like, oh, people may have more skills than me. They may have been doing this longer than me. But one thing that I came to realize is they may have all those things, but one thing they can't beat my hustle and they can't beat my determination. And with that, as I told you all, I graduated from college debt-free. I had to be persistent with that. I stayed countless hours in the tutoring lab having teachers and professors look over my essays. I spent countless hours on the computer researching scholarships that I could best qualify for. And I spent countless hours volunteering and doing leadership roles in my community. And number 4 is to plant seeds. Whether it's investing in your community, helping a young person out, going to your friend's art show, investing in a business, paying your tithes and offerings at a church, or however you choose to plant your seeds, you never know, they can come back to you 10 times fold. Ecclesiastes 11:6 says, "Be sure to plant a variety of crops, for you never know which will grow. Perhaps they all will." 'Cause you find it kind of hard, don't you fall now. For I still going, boy. I still climbing, and life for me has not been no crystal stair. I'm Cedric Brown, and if you like, you can check out some more of my beautiful pieces. I'm in the exhibitor hall, booth 720. Thank you all for listening.
All right, Cedric. Oh, she's holding up his scarf. Look. All right, Cedric.
I mean, your mama giving Dave Chappelle a run for his money, dog. Yeah, mama ain't no joke. She must have gone to University of Michigan, boy, I tell you. And I noticed you naming all these stars and stuff. I ain't heard no public intellectuals you dressing. I mean, handsome, articulate people like Professor Hamilton. And if you got anything left over for me, I mean, we need clothes too. All right? Give it up for that young man.
720. 720.
720.
Free stuff.
Is that your height, man? You don't even know him, huh? There you go. He looking for some free clothes. Don't even listen to that nigga, man. Stick with me, bruh. Stick with me up here. Michelle Meyer-Ship joined KPMG LLP, right, as Principal and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer in August 2018. In this role, she leads the National Inclusion and Diversity I&D team and oversees its strategy and objectives, including supporting the recruitment, retention, and development of a diverse workforce, inspiring broad perspectives and innovative client solutions, and fostering an inclusive and accessible culture. She served as a member of Twitter's Diversity Advisory Council. Can you get one person off of Twitter? I'm just asking for a friend. He stands up every morning to excrete the feces of his moral depravity into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode.
Lord have mercy.
Just asking for a friend, just seeing if you can help us out. And Working Mother Media's Multicultural Women's Advisory Board. She's an active board member of the National Organization on Disability. Welcome, Ms. Michelle C. Meyer-Ship.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks, Michael. So you all are probably wondering what's left. I mean, we've got scarves, we've got all of these great insights, but I'm going to actually just jump right in because I know we're closing out on time and say this. Congresswoman Beatty started this conversation and said this is personal. She started this conversation saying how she got into this work because it was really personal to her. We heard a lot of great ideas and solutions and tactics that we can put in place at the structural level and at the organizational level and at the political level to drive diversity and inclusion. But what I want to do right now is spend some time talking about all of you and the things that you need to do to help us move this needle. I'm not going to do a corporate talk about diversity and inclusion because we've already done that, and I'm glad that that's handled because I want to talk to you about what each of you needs to do to help us move the needle. Here's the deal. I totally agree with everything that my co-panelists said here, totally agree, wholeheartedly. But I also, as an employment lawyer who practiced employment law for 17 years, as a professional who has worked in the private sector, in the public sector, I've worked on 2 government administrations, I work in C-suites across corporate America for global institutions. And I'm going to tell you, for me, and why I walked away from employment law, is because I realized that this is a fundamental issue about humanity and the fundamental flaws that we all have and walk with every day as we navigate society. So yes, everything everybody said here is important, but there are things that we each need to do as we walk every single day across this earth, not only in our workplaces, but in our communities, in our homes, in our churches. We need to change our behavior, and we need to help change the behavior of those around us. So a couple key things that have come to me in doing this. Now remember, as I tell you these tips, I'm an employment lawyer, I'm a chief diversity officer, and I've just raised 3 young African-American men who are walking the streets of this earth every day. 17, 18, and 21 years old. So these insights are not just corporate professional insights, but these are real life insights from somebody that's leading this work every day. Couple things going on out there that I think is hindering us and that will keep us in this space if we don't handle it. One, you've heard many people on this panel talk about it, it's the bias. The bias is real. Affinity bias is the bias that nobody really talks about, but it's that like me bias. We all do it. I don't care if you're white, black, brown, yellow, green. We all navigate in our likeness. Everything we do is in our likeness. So think about this. When I went with my sons looking at colleges, the first place I wanted to go was the college campus cafeteria. And I could walk in the cafeteria and say to my boys, you know what, you're not going here. Because notice what's happening in this cafeteria. Everybody has self-segregated. All right? We do it in elementary school, we do it in middle school, our kids choose to do it in college. On college campuses across America, right, they actually have housing for students where they can self-segregate. My son had the option of moving in the black dorm, the Christian dorm, the this dorm, the that dorm. I'm like, why are we separating ourselves from one another? We are continuing to drive divisiveness in this country, and then we expect these young kids to graduate from college and go off into corporate America and be good corporate inclusive leaders. Yeah, right. Right? When did we ever teach them to behave in that way? That's one. Second issue that is countering us right now and attacking us is the stereotype threats, right? And you know what? Cedric, you talked about that. You're still there? Cedric talked about it. The commercials, the media, the news images, the things we see have literally, to your point, Joe, culturally conditioned all of us to assume certain things about certain people. I do a class at work where I put images up on the screen of people to just test bias. I put a white guy up with tattoos all over him, and I say to a room full of people like you, so folks, what do you think about this guy? What's his story? Gangbanger, thug, drug dealer? No, he was actually the mayor of Braddock County, Pennsylvania, and he ran for Senate, and he graduated from Harvard University. That's just one example, but we all, every single day, make snap judgments and decisions about other human beings that are often very wrong, and we don't take the time to get to know them. Issue 2. Issue 3, and this is real, and we all know this, especially if you're black or brown in America today, fear. Fear is real, and especially in the society we live in today, with the issues we have around leadership in this nation, okay? There is crime and acts of terrorism happening against people of color, people of different ethnic, racial, religious backgrounds all across the nation. We live in fear. And you know what? Not all, but many, and I've heard them say it, many white people are living in fear too. You know why? Anybody know why? Because there is something called the browning of America that's happening. So the seats of power are a little shook, right? We had a black president for 8 years. And I think that shook some people around, oh man, if they could get in the White House and the numbers are growing like they're growing, what's gonna happen to my power? So we are all operating in fear. Every time one of my kids gets in a car, I drop to my knees, and I kid you not. I have a tracking device on my phone where I monitor every move my boys make, right? And my white colleagues talk about the fear that they have because of the things they heard about our people when they were growing up sitting at their dinner table, right? So we're all operating in fear. That's a problem. Fourth issue, we have a lack of understanding about one another. We don't know what we don't know about each other's experiences, and what we do is we get together in our groups, black, white, women, men, gay, straight, whatever, and we talk to each other about all of the problems that are confronting us, but we're not talking to the other people. We're not having a dialogue across difference. We are never going to get anywhere if we don't have a candid conversation about difference. Key example, Saturday night about a year ago, my doorbell rings. I look out on the camera on my front porch. I live in the woods, by the way, in New Jersey, central New Jersey, in the woods. I look on the camera and I see 3 people in white hoodies. And I'm thinking, okay, they want us out. Time to go. It's time for the black people on the block to go. They've come to tell me it's time to leave. My husband ran, grabbed a bat. My kids were all running, grabbing stuff. Guess who it turned out to be? The 3 white neighbors across the street coming to welcome us to the neighborhood. 10 o'clock on a Saturday night because they wanted to take my 3 brown boys outside to play manhunt. So I stood there and said, yes. So this goes back to lack of understanding across difference, right? So I look at these three very well-intentioned young men, and I was like, they don't even get it. These brown boys can't go out and play manhunt in the dark in the woods. They will get shot. These three white boys didn't even appreciate at that moment the space of privilege in which they walked. And the mere fact that they could run in the backyard and play. So you know what I had to do the next day? I had to muster up the courage to call his mother to say, you know what, you might want to come on over and we need to have a drink over this one. Because I needed to help her understand that the world that I live in and the world that my boys live in is not the world that she and her family lives in. And that woman sat there, my hair is literally standing up on my arms right now because that woman broke down and cried like a baby. She had no clue because she never had to, right? So we don't know what we don't know about one another's experiences. We keep hiding in our same race dorms. We keep hiding in our same race groups and networks and talking to each other and not to each other, across each other. This is never going to change. Never. Even with all the laws, the legislation, and everything that everyone mentioned, it's never going to change because people, human beings, are making the decisions about our people every single day. So if we don't get to this, if we don't get to the very heart of the matter, all of this is for naught. So some takeaways for you all as we get ready to wrap, all right? Simply put, if you remember nothing else that I said, I'm going to tell you this. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm going to say that one more time to you, all right? You all hear me, right? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Interrupt your own biases. What do you go to? What's your natural tendency? I challenge you to interrupt that every day. Every day, right? 2, interrupt your snap judgments about other people. What are you doing and how are you using your stereotypical thoughts, right, to set you away from other people? 3, don't let the fear paralyze you. And I know that's a hard one because it gets me every day. But do not let fear paralyze you. We need to talk to each other. If you need counseling, I mean, let me tell you for real, every now and again I got to go talk to someone about the fear that we're living in and that we're navigating today. That's real. And finally, talk to each other across difference in your organizations, in your communities, in your schools. I get why we have, in our corporations, we have ERGs, affinity groups. At our schools, we have multicultural clubs, we have student organizations, blah, blah, blah. But if we're not getting together to talk across the divide, we are never going to get anywhere. And to that point, I'll close on this and tell you that to Joe's point, the CEO Action for Diversity that he mentioned, my chairwoman, Lynn Dowdy, was one of the co-signers of that with Tim Ryan from PwC. And they called me about a year ago. I had just stepped into KPMG. I was about 2 months there. And she called me up and she said, she said, Tim has this idea. He wants all of our companies to have a dialogue across difference. And I said, and you're going to let me do it? She was like, yeah, I want you to do it across the entire organization, 36,000 people. I was like, I came to work at the right place because this is where it's at. And we drove dialogues across difference. It was mandatory for all of our employees, and I had my white male partners lead the dialogue. The survey feedback response that we got from it was eye-opening because it went right to the heart of the matter. People learned what they were missing. They saw their bias. They came to appreciate what they didn't know about each other's experience. And now I am watching every day our people in our organization interact with each other in a much more authentic and appreciative way across difference. So my call to you is get comfortable being uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Manhunt, huh?
Manhunt.
I don't care if it's 12 noon. It ain't the time of day. I'm saying, be careful. I love white folk. Come on, y'all. That's like a few years ago, they were trying to get us on ships, and look how that turned out. We have 10 minutes for questions. Very, very brief. If you got a question, line up. Please just make it very brief, and I'll just point to, we'll point to someone up here to answer very briefly so we can get in a few, all right? Just 10 minutes of questions.
Hello, my name is Cedric Mutabi. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm a medical student. Thank you for the wonderful panel. I had a question for Michelle and for the rest of the group as well. I know you mentioned that the fact that us as a community, we love to get together and we love having that safety and space. And I've been in a few diversity and inclusion workshops to help to bring those cross dialogues that we need. But how do you go about working with institutions, working with school groups to kind of foster that early on? Because as we want to prepare this workforce that has those, that have had those conversations early on, so that you're not reaching the age of 30, 40, not having heard these, which makes it a lot easier for them to start to have that culture of diversity and inclusion without it just being an initiative and something.
That's a great question.
We'll just have you answer that.
No, great question. I would say somebody has to start the conversation, right? So as a parent, I started it, and I could spend hours talking to you about the conversations I've started at my son's schools, both their colleges and their high schools. But if there's no, adult teacher, faculty that started the conversation, you start the conversation. Find someone to talk to say, we need to talk about this, and build it into the portfolio of the curriculum in some way, even if it's just a lunchtime chat to start, but start the conversation.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Adadawa Adeniyi. I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria, but I guess I can represent North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina. This is a question for anybody on the panel. Automation is inevitable. More than 60% of the automation risk for the African American workforce is concentrated in occupations such as admin, sales clerks, and transportation services. With African Americans being among the most vulnerable to this change, what role do you believe the public, private, and the government sector can do to alleviate this vulnerability?
Either Professor Hamilton, Ms. Robinson, either one of y'all want to answer that? Okay. All right.
I guess I would push back on the notion that automation leading to job displacement is inevitable. I think historically we've seen that America has gone through technological revolutions, and some of the rhetoric that exists today existed then. New forms of jobs that we can't conceive of have emerged from those technological revolutions. What's new now with automation is what people are calling machine learning. So some people are arguing that that's unprecedented and we don't know what's going to occur from that. That said, most of the dominant arguments from economists is that it is at the very least exaggerated the extent to which automation will lead to just job displacement immediately. The final thing I want to say is that the best buffer against automation or any type of fluctuation in job markets, and you are absolutely right that blacks are disproportionately and will be disproportionately affected by this automation, is a federal job guarantee. There is work to be done that's not being done, that's productive work, that could ensure employment and those activities that would buffer against automation and technological change.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Exchange-traded funds. They're the modern-day mutual fund, ETFs, like a basket. Walk into the grocery store, you can get a basket of vegetables. Well, an ETF, you can get a basket of companies. What if we could create for the 17 million 401ks and IRAs a basket of companies that thrive and do well in diversity initiatives? So, for example, who have the largest number of Black American managers and executives and directors, so that the 17 million investors, all of us have a 401k, can dump our money into those companies and they can be rewarded for their excellent diversity initiatives, such as the ones that you have discussed today. I'll take your response from my seat. Thank you.
Okay. Any one person? Mr. Rogers?
Probably for me with the mutual fund family. Great, thank you. I would just say that right now for the ETF market, the NAACP has actually created a product like that, and they're out marketing it currently, and I've had some meetings with them, and it's something that is starting to grow and build. I have to say that's a competitive threat to what Ariel Mutual Funds does, as we try to grow our mutual fund family and get into 401k plans and have individual investors invest with us. And I know Eddie Brown would feel the same way with his Brown investment program, mutual funds in Baltimore. So I think both ideas can probably coexist, but it would be great if people are making these decisions, asking their financial advisors to use funds that care about people of color.
Beautiful. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good morning. My name is Natalie St. Clair. Thank you for being here. So my question is, how can Black communities protect themselves from predatory lending like subprime lending and now rebranded as non-prime? Is there anything going on in the political realm that's being done to protect minority families? And second part is there anything being done to help families that lost a substantial amount of wealth during the recession?
Professor Hamilton?
I mean, there are proposals like postal banking. And what postal banking is intended to do is address the low end of the market to ensure that those people that are most vulnerable aren't susceptible to predation. So an individual strategy, frankly, sadly, there is not an individual strategy. There's a collective effort that Black people can do that can lobby and to ensure that those that are most vulnerable, again, are not the most susceptible to predation. Basically, their bottom feeders can prey upon them because they have limited to no other alternative when you're at that point. In terms of wealth building policies, there's many, and I guess in the interest of time, I shouldn't get into them, or don't get into them.
Okay.
Okay.
Afterward, check Professor Hamilton out. He'll break it down for you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Katina McClinton. I'm the legislative chair of National Association of Black Women in Construction and the owner of Fresh Start Development, licensed in Florida. And we all know that trillions of dollars will be spent in infrastructure over the next several years. Who will help us advocate for disparity studies in our cities to ensure that our Black-owned businesses receive equitable access to contracts?
Anybody want to take that? All right.
I'll just jump in real quickly and say that I think it's what we talked about earlier. We all need to support progressive leaders like Congresswoman Beatty and others that are fighting for fairness and inclusion, and again, in the spirit of Maynard Jackson and Harold Washington and those great heroes. And then we need to support our civil rights organizations. So many doors have been opened because of people like Reverend Jackson, Reverend Sharpton, Mark Morial, et cetera. And too many times we find excuses not to support our progressive leaders, both politically and community-wise. That's the only way these doors will get forced open. Otherwise, people continue to do business with people who look like them, that they're comfortable with. That often excludes us.
I would just add to that the city of Atlanta earlier this year created an Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Innovation, and you need at the local level, I think, cities who are looking proactively at bringing capital to small businesses, opportunities in their communities, and obviously mentioning Harold Washington. Clearly, when it comes to contracting efforts, we need to make sure at the local level that they're looking broadly to make sure that minority and women-owned businesses are included in that process.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kenat Sageye. I have lived here 42 years, working hard labor, single mother. And I bought a first property thinking that I was going to retire independently. 1990. 2005, I went and asked Equity Line. Wells Fargo took the money, $250,000 that I have here, put it in their pocket, whoever they gave it. And now they sue me. I never been in front of the judge. Witnesses never been called. No evidence, no investigation. They're getting ready to throw me out of my house. I want everybody here, humanly possible, to ask the Supreme Court to reopen my case. I never went in front of the judge. I was completely ripped off, getting ready to be a homeless. How can he help me?
What we will do is we will make sure we get your information and handle it through Congressional Affairs and connect you with your representative, okay? We appreciate you. Sorry.
But that testimony speaks to a narrative that, Michelle talked about humanity, the need to insert humanity into our discourse, to start thinking about economic goods in the frame of morality, humanity, and sustainability. This is important to note. For the past 40 years, we've had a country where, with increasing productivity, real wages have remained roughly flat. We need a change of public power to be used in a manner that's not simply trying to facilitate market incentives for trickle-down economics from corporations, but rather one that is grounded in things like humanity to ensure that all of our people are protected from predation and that there are a base level of resources so that an example like that does not occur.
All right. All right. If there are no more questions, then we will take a picture. Yes.